Hi everyone, and welcome back to London's Dark Archives. If you're new here, this channel explores the true crime history of Britain's capital, the real people, real places, and real power struggles that shape the streets. In this brand new series, we're stepping into the shadows of pre-war London to explore the rise and eventual ruin of two of the most influential gangland figures this city's ever known, Jack Spot and Billy Hill. Their story ain't just one of crime and corruption, it's a tale of loyalty, betrayal, politics and power. It takes us from the poverty of the East End to the smoke-filled back rooms of Soho's gambling dens, and it begins in the 1930s, when the streets of London were already ruled by fists, fear and favours. Just a quick note before we dive in. This episode contains references to violence, anti-Semitism and the harsh realities of life in London slums during the early 20th century. Some of the language and attitudes discussed reflect the time period and not endorsed in any way. They're included to preserve the authenticity of the historical record. With that said, let's step back in time to a city on the edge of change. Before the Krays ruled, before the Richardsons turned electric shock into business as usual, London had a different kind of underworld king. This is the story of how London's criminal empire was first built, not in the shadows, but out in the open, with a wink, an handshake, and a flick knife tucked in a pocket. The 1930s. London was a city stuck between two wars, and it showed. Bombed, battered, and broke. The stock market had crashed. The depression had bitten deep. Whole families crammed into slum housing, scraping by on dock work, factory shifts, or the few shillings they could hustle from the grey economy. Tension weren't just economic, it was political. Oswald Mosley's black shirts were marching. Anti-fascist groups were forming. The streets was angry, divided, ripe for control. But where there's chaos, there's opportunity. Illegal bookies line the high streets, rigged roulette wheels spun behind the curtains of East End cafes, and the real money changed hands in the smoke-filled back rooms. Horse racing was king. Control the racecourses and you controlled London's underworld. And before the Krays even picked up their first blade, that power belonged to others, old families like the Sabinis, the Corteses, Italian gangs with one foot in Soho and the other in Clerkenwell. But they weren't the only ones muscling in. A new kind of operator was rising, sharper, more modern, less about brute force, more about organisation. This new world needed someone with vision, a man who could talk to judges and punch a rival in the same breath. Someone who could offer protection with one hand and shake yours with the other. That man was Jack Spot. Just before we meet him, you need to understand the world he come from. A world where loyalty was currency and betrayal was a death sentence. Whitechapel, early 1920s. In these streets, you didn't need a silver spoon, just fast feet and sharper instincts. Jacob Kohlberg was born in 1912 to Polish Jewish immigrants. His father was a tailor, like so many in the East End, working long hours for little coin, keeping his head down in a city that often looked the other way. They lived in the kind of cramped, rat-ridden housing that stank of damp and desperation. 5 kids to a room, queue for the outside loo, cockroaches on the skirting boards. That was home. But Jack didn't take to poverty quietly. From the age of 10 he was already grafting, running errands for the market traders, helping out down a local kosher butcher's, anything for a few pennies. He had the natural instinct for spotting trouble and avoiding it, fast on his feet, fast with his mouth. That's where the name came from, Jack Spot. Always on the spot when someone was about to kick off. But he weren't just a thug, not yet. Not like the older boys who fought in the back streets with iron bars and boot knives. Jack had something else. He had presence. He watched, he listened, he remembered who owed what who could be leaned on and who you never crossed. The East End in the 1930s had its own law. Police were either paid off or powerless. Respect come from your fists, your word, and how well you could control your patch. Jack only started small, protection rackets for market stalls, fixing fights for local bookies, helping rig street dice games, but he was clever with it. He didn't just threaten, he negotiated, made people feel like they were getting a deal, until they weren't. Jack wore suits even when he couldn't afford them. He spoke soft, smiled often, but if you crossed him you'd find yourself minus a kneecap, or with your stock smashed up, no explanation from the coppers. He kept things tidy, efficient, businessman with a blade. And by the time most boys his age were still shining shoes, Jack was managing after gambling in Spitalfields. But the real power in London? Well, that sat with the Italians. The Sabinis and the Corteses run the racetracks. Epsom, Ascot, Brighton. They took their cut from the bookies, ruled the fighting rings, and had the judges in their pockets. Jack weren't ready to take them on. Not yet. But he was watching, taking notes, building his network. He never forgot his roots. Jack's Jewish identity weren't just cultural, it was political. As fascism crept into Britain in the form of Oswald Mosley's black shirts, Jack didn't just sit back. He funded the soup kitchens in the East End, paid for legal defence when Jewish lads were arrested, and anti-fascist scuffles. And when it came to Cable Street, some say Jack helped plan what happened behind the barricades. Jack Spot knew how to play the public. To his community, he was a protector. To his enemies, a tactician. And to the growing underworld, he was a name to be feared. But empires are never built alone, and as Jack Spot climbed higher, a young face was watching from the crowd, learning, waiting. Billy Hill, a kid from Seven Dials who'd learned everything he could from Jack Spot, before decided he wanted the throne for himself. By the close of the 1930s, Jack Spot had become more than just a name whispered in alleyways. He was a power in his own right. He ran protection rackets in the East End, had a hand in off-course race betting, illegal card games, and he was quietly extending his influence into Soho's vice trade. He kept the markets quiet and the streets ordered, for a fee of course. But what set Jack apart weren't just muscle, it was brains. He understood the importance of alliances, favours and image. To some he was a villain, to others a community protector, a rare figure in gangland folklore who could turn on the charm as quickly as he could turn on the knife. But no king rules alone, and in the shadows of Jack's growing empire, a new face was watching, clever, ruthless and ambitious, a boy who would one day reshape the underworld in his own image. In the next episode, we'll trace Billy's rise from a broken home in King's Cross to his first jobs under Jack's watchful eye. How a streetwise teenager become the heir apparent to London's criminal throne, and how the bond between mentor and protégé would eventually give way to ambition, power and bloodshed. Thanks for watching London's Dark Archives. If you enjoyed this episode, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what moment from Jack's story stood out to you. Until next time, stay sharp and stay curious.